Welcome to the audio collection The Unpublishables, written and performed by Pete Tolarie, www.petetolarie.com. This book contains mature situations and may not be suitable for those easily offended. My name's Tolarie, Pete Tolarie, and this is a story I call 4 and 5 on the Inside, Part 3. Brian dug his cleats into the clay. He swung his bat 3 times before holstering his magic stick inches above his right shoulder. I looked to Johnny for the sign. The 1-1 came down, and I threw a fastball on the outside of the plate. Brian caught the ball late and fouled it over to right field, out of play. I was getting tired, and Brian was going to have none of that. "Strike one," Frogman stated clearly as he pulled another ball out of his pocket and handed it to Johnny. Johnny threw me the ball and crouched in. I looked for the sign. He called for the 4-1 with his thumb inside. Johnny wanted a fastball high and inside, a brushback. I didn't want to throw a beanball to Brian, so I shook it off. Again came the sign from Johnny, 4-1. I looked to our coach in the dugout as he nodded at me. I nodded okay to Johnny and began my wind-up. Brian was sitting on top of the plate after the last outside pitch, and I let loose with a little chin music. The pitch pushed him off the plate and made him fall backwards. Cheers came from our dugout as the crowd gasped and then let out a collective boo. "Whenever you have the chance to win, whatever it is, you take it." Heath's words echoed in my mind as I looked into Johnny for the call. Johnny looked to the bench and then gave with the 1-2, curveball. I threw the pitch. It was a little outside, and Johnny grabbed the ball and pulled it quickly into the center position. "Ball one," the umpire croaked. Brian stepped out of the batter's box, tapped the bat on the bottom of each of his shoes, and then stepped back into the plate. As he was again digging in his heels, I looked to Johnny for the sign. I got it and looked into the stands. Jennifer was no longer looking at me. She was holding her hands to her face and staring intently at Brian. At first, I thought my brushback must have startled her, but when she removed her hands from her face, I saw that look that had first been for Brian, then for me, then back to him. Brian saw my distraction, looked to the stands, and stepped from the box. Johnny stood up, called time, and walked out to the mound. "What gives?" he asked as he approached. "Brian's girlfriend," I replied. "Weird stuff all game. Voodoo stuff, I think. Makes me almost hate girls." "Well, do that love-hate thing on your own time. Right now, we got a game to win. You gonna be all right?" Johnny asked. "I'm fine. Let's finish it," I said. Maybe I said, "Let's finish this," or "Let's get this done." I'm not exactly sure. It was a while ago, and my mind had been pulled in many directions. Did I mention that whole hormone thing? Johnny turned and walked back to the plate. He crouched down as he moved into position, looked at Brian, then back to me. He gave me the 4-4, slider low and inside. I threw the pitch as Brian let loose with a home run swing that sailed just above the ball. "Strike two," the umpire yelled. The count was 1-2. Brian knew I had a pitch to waste, and so did Johnny. Brian came back to the plate as Johnny gave the sign. 4-5. A knuckleball low and inside. I knew Brian couldn't hit my 4-5. It was my best stuff, and had only been used twice all season. "When you have the chance to win." I shook off the call. Johnny looked back to the bench, turned back to me, and again called for the 4-5. "This is the race." I again shook off the call. Johnny shook his head, dusted off the area in front of him, and signaled for the 4-1. Great. If I wasn't going to strike him out, I was going to strike him in the head. I agreed to the call and threw the ball. Brian ducked into the plate as the ball sailed well off to the right side. "Throw me something real, you shit," Brian yelled as he regained his composure and dug back in, refusing to leave the batter's box. The Cardinals coach came running out of their dugout and began arguing with the umpire. Our coach came out, and Johnny stood up. They all argued for a short time as the crowd continued with their disapproval. The other two teams scheduled to play in the evening game had also joined in with the crowd. The Giants were the home team for the next game. As they argued, I continued to think about Mr. Heath and what he had taught me. Who told you that? When you have the chance to win, this is the race. No one really looks at how you win. Eventually, the coaches went back to their dugouts. Jennifer looked at me. Johnny went back into his crouch. Jennifer looked at Brian. Brian stepped back into the box. Johnny gave me the 4 and 5. I shook him off. Johnny came back with the 4 and 5. I shook him off again. Johnny gave up and called for the 1 and 1. I nodded and threw my fastball. Brian caught a part of the pitch, and it went over the backstop and into the crowd. Jennifer stood up to catch the ball when a man behind her pulled the ball out of the air from just above her reach. Jennifer looked at Brian again. As the umpire tossed me a new ball, I began to think about what it meant to win. What was winning, after all? Was the win a strikeout of my friend? Was it a ground out to the infield, or maybe a flyout? Was the end result of the game the real win? Mr. Heath never said anything about what the winning position was, just how to get there. What was the actual goal? I just wanted to turn the game back over to Jay. I looked into Johnny for the sign. I knew what was coming before he even crouched down. With a 3-ball count in the bottom of the 9th, with the score tied and the Giants waiting to pull a game closer to us, Johnny had to call for the knuckleball low and inside. He did. I shook off the pitch. I thought about how my friend Ralph had hurt me. I looked back to Johnny for the call. 4 and 5. When you have the chance to win, no matter what it is, take it. No one really looks at how you win. I nodded to Johnny and began my wind-up. I threw a fastball fat enough to glaze a ham. I know you don't really glaze a ham with fat, but it's a baseball term, and what do baseball players really know about how to cook? Anyway, any more meat on that horsehide, and the USDA would have had to put its stamp of approval on the thing. Brian took a mighty swing and pounded the ball at least 20 feet over the left field fence. I watched the ball with my hands on my knees as it soared away. After I saw it land, I turned to the stands to see most all of them standing and cheering for my friend. I found Jennifer and saw her as she glowed with admiration while Brian rounded the bases. You shit, Johnny said as he came out to the mound before Brian reached third. I called for the 4 and 5. No one really looks at how you win. I know, I said as Brian crossed home plate with his game-winning home run. Johnny walked back to the dugout, as did the rest of our team. I continued to stand on the mound. After the Cardinals had congratulated Brian on his hit, but well before the crowd stopped cheering, Brian walked out to me. I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait till next year, ran through my mind. That was my best stuff, Brian, I said as he stopped in front of me. Brian slapped my shoulder, turned and walked back to his dugout. The Giants were already taking the field when I looked to the stands to see Jennifer come down and greet and then hug Brian after the game. She had no looks for me, and believe me, I checked for quite a while. To this day, I'm not sure who really won that day. The Cardinals lost in the next round to the Giants. We beat the Giants for the championship. I played first base the last 3 games. Brian played 2 more years of baseball in the GBA and in school. I played into my first year at the junior college. Brian and Jennifer dated for a few months. I ran into him on Chester Avenue just after Christmas, and he was looking at my date with longing eyes. Brian went to trade school and learned to weld. He worked in the industry for a few years, and we hung out a few times. Last I heard, he had become a minister in a local church and was married to the pastor's daughter. Johnny went to college, joined the Air Force, and flew F-111 bombers for the last part of the century. Jay Donato, the pitcher who started that game, became a respected lawyer in Bakersfield. I ran into him in a bar on Chester Avenue at lunch break during my jury duty. He remembered me, but didn't know from where or when. Heath, well, he ended his career as an administrator in the school district under duress after some homosexual hazings were reported to my colleagues at the paper a few years ago. Not from Heath, I mean. He had no knowledge of the hazing, but he was still canned along with the school principal and the basketball coach. I never did date Jennifer again. In fact, I didn't see much of her for the next 3 years. One day, she showed up at the theater where I was selling tickets with her husband. Well, I was selling tickets, she was with her husband. I smiled at her and offered the two of them passes for the show. Her new guy signed the form on the clipboard as my guest and then asked me for his $20 back. "I gave you a $20 for our tickets before you gave us the clipboard," he yelled at me. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I don't remember taking anything from you." "Oh yeah, you took it. So either sell me 2 real tickets or give me back my cash." He was a vocal and arrogant asshole. I gave him $20 and I apologized to both of them. Jennifer never looked at me. Yeah, I was $20 short in my till that night. As for me, well, I'm trying to scratch out enough money covering the local beat for the paper to pay my rent, eat daily, and set up a few cheap martinis. I'm a hack for hire. I traded my glove for a typewriter, my cleats for a pack of smokes, and my soul for a byline. The memory of the game faded from my mind. The sounds of spring were soon overshadowed by the noises from the nearby train yard. The wind had shifted, and the clangs and whistles were now wafting into my hot room above the garage. All of the sounds of spring were gone, except that damn tree toad, that is. I looked again at the blank page in front of me. I've got to get out of this hot room for a while. Maybe I'll get dressed and head over to the downtown desk. This is just crazy. I got to find something to write about. The end. You've been listening to the audio collection, The Unpublishables, Episode 6, 4 and 5 on the Inside, Part 3, written and performed by Pete Tolarie. www.petetolarie.com. This podcast was recorded at the hot room above the garage, with additional production, editing, and mixing by Jay Caruso. Content herein is property of Pete Tolarie. To find out more about the author and to find additional stories, visit www.petetolarie.com. The theme music, Relax and Suffocation by the original rhythm section of Cradle of Thorns, provided by Jay Caruso. If you like this book, please tell your friends. Better yet, leave a donation. In any case, thanks for listening.